Thank you for coming along today, really appreciate that. It's really good to kick off with this, what should be quite an interesting little discussion today about the behavioural issues when it comes to our backyard chooks. Last time we looked at the bedding and nesting, I believe, some of those other issues that we looked at last month. This is a second part of our the winter series, the 3-part series. Please let me know if you can't hear me and I'll just shout a bit louder. Alright, so we do have a little bit of road noise, which isn't ideal. This time we're looking at behaviour. Our hens, when we get them back into our backyards, they can develop various feather pecking behaviours. Some of them are a little bit more worse than others. Alright, so we have gentle feather pecking, which is quite normal. It's a very normal type of behaviour. They'll gently peck at each other. When you do bring your hens home to start with, they will tend to be a little bit more aggressive. They're sorting out the hierarchy, who's boss lady and who's not. So you have a little bit more chasing, a little bit more interaction, a bit of squawking now and again, and you might see the occasional feather. That's all quite normal. That's all to be expected from your hens when they're settling in and sorting out that hierarchy of the pecking order. That may change too at different times, and we're going to go through some of the key stressors, I guess. The key things that will tip a hen into more of that feather pecking behaviour. So then we have severe feather pecking, and that's something we want to avoid at all costs in our flock. When the hen has been aggressively pecking at another hen, removing feathers, plucking out feathers, and sometimes even causing a bit of damage to the other birds, some wounds, sometimes bleeding, hopefully not. But that's a very damaging and a very negative form of feather pecking that we want to avoid, and we're going to look at that over the course of this presentation. So, the key causes when it comes to feather pecking is stress. Alright, so some of these stresses, it's really birds that are unable to cope with the stress. They all cope with stress differently, but like us humans, some hens can handle stress okay. There's always a certain level of stress in the coop, but yeah, some handle it a little bit better than others. Sometimes it's just that additional stress that just puts them over the edge, and they become, they engage in this much more negative, aggressive feather pecking behaviour, which we need to stamp out. Active birds, all right, those more active birds, they want to be out there doing more stuff, they get more bored. They tend to be the aggressor. They tend to be the ones that are doing the more damaging feather pecking behaviour, because like I say, they're easily bored. They don't have that stimulation in their coop. They tend to going to run around and start to peck at anything they can, and they're going to start to get into this more aggressive feather pecking behaviour. The calmer birds, the ones that are more laissez-faire, it's no problem. You don't tend to have heightened levels of feather pecking, negative feather pecking from those birds with a more gentle demeanour. So we like a nice calm flock. It's very important. High stress affects a lot of things in our flocks. A huge range of issues that come with a flock with high stress levels. So we've got egg laying, of course. Egg laying stops. You can get white shells to the egg. You get just a lack of egg production. They stop laying. They slow down with the egg laying if they're under stress. Poor growth, that's right, and poor maintenance of their body weight if they're under stress. They can lose weight. They say very similar to us humans. We're under stress, we are going to lose weight. We're at that heightened state. We're much more susceptible to disease, much more susceptible to viruses, parasites, any negative influence that comes into the coop. Your chickens under stress are going to be the first ones to pick it up, and they're going to be damaged more by that disease that may come into the coop. So yeah, high stress levels is a really negative thing to have in your coop, and so we need to minimise that. The damaging feather pecking is one key way that keeps the whole flock on notice. They're all a bit concerned with that type of thing going on.
Use the hen to show where they get pecked.
Oh really?
Yeah.
All right, well this is Exhibit A. We have a hen here, rather floppy legs. Now pecking wise, yeah, so classic areas for being pecked on a hen, certainly around the vent area, right? There's just more skin exposed, right? Any sort of pinkish, any pink, any redness, that's just a natural area that chickens will want to peck at. For aggressive feather pecking, we often have it down around the base of the tail feathers, and that's often called silverbacking. And it's because they remove some of the darker feathers, the top longer feathers of the back, and they get down to these soft downy feathers, and it sort of looks white or silverish. So they call it silver backing. There's a gland down here situated at the very base of the the back. My wife loves the name of this gland, and it's called the Behavioural gland. All right, so different ways of pronouncing it. The Behavioural gland, isn't it, darling? Yeah. So there's a little gland. It's a little oil gland basically, and it's what's also called the preening gland. And the bird basically will twist its little head around. It's a bit hard to twist this one without causing it pain, but comes around and they access the oil from this gland and they spread it over their feathers. So you often see, won't you, when they're preening, they get the head back and they access this gland, the oil from this gland. So with aggressive feather pecking, they will tend to attack that area, ironically. So you can often have the silver backing, missing feathers from this area, and a bad case of feather pecking. But also you can get patchy feathers that are missed. That are missing from the bird, often broken. Sorry, yes?
Do they ever peck the head?
Yeah, they can do. Yes, can do. Aggressive pecking will often target the head too. Yeah, definitely. You can draw blood from the comb as well.
We went away for the weekend and we came back and it looks like it had a buzz cut.
All right, yeah. So yeah, it can be as well. Yeah, the pecking at the head of the bird. But the classic area is certainly around the vent area and the silver backing, then the lower back area. Classic area for a more aggressive feather pecking behaviour. So, stress and coping. So we've got environmental stress. The more it is, the greater it is rather, the greater the negative feather pecking behaviour in the flock. That feather pecking behaviour will tend to come from, I say, the more active birds, the more curious birds, the ones that become bored easily. They'll be the culprit as far as that feather pecking behaviour. So common types, stressful situations, travel, from where you buy the birds, typically here, back home. We put them in the box. It's all a bit foreign to them. They're quite comfortable in the box, well ventilated, transport box or a cat carrier, quite happy in there. But it's an unfamiliar situation compared to when they've been here in the shed with their mates. They've got up in perches, all the food and water available for them. They're quite happy. So they're into a box, and then they're off to a new environment, being your backyard. So that's a heightened stressor for them. So that's a time when they can indulge in a bit of negative feather pecking when they get into your home. So we've got to settle them down as quickly as possible so that behaviour doesn't take hold and we get more issues. So a new coop, quite unnerving for them. Weather, of course. Weather's a big one. Hot weather, anything over sort of 30 degrees, that's a real stressor on the chickens, and that can cause feather pecking behaviour. As does cold weather, of course. Very cold weather can also just heighten this, cause that stress levels to raise, and that's it, bang. That bored, a more active chicken starts to peck at the others, and more aggressively. Diseases, of course, any disease challenge can really be a big factor when it comes to raising stress levels, either being the sick bird, being seen as sort of weaker, and the more active dominant bird starts to peck away at this weaker one, and we need to remove those birds as soon as we notice that they're compromised in some way. They may be a bit quieter because they're suffering. Oftentimes they will be very quiet, lethargic, rock back and like little penguins, and they fluff up when they're not feeling so well. So we want to be mindful of that. Predators, of course, predator activity, also rodents. Wild bird activity, wild birds flying around, they can scare the chickens at times. So they can all heighten that stress level as well. And parasites, and particularly mites. Of course, red mites have been shocking in the past year, and that's something that causes heightened stress levels in your birds because they're busy, they're preening, they're trying to remove these mites from them. At night time, the mites are up there feeding off the birds, drinking their blood, and that's very uncomfortable for the birds, and it really causes a lot of stress. So next thing you know, you've got these birds attacking each other when there's been mites in the environment because they're feeling stress, and they start to indulge in negative feather pecking behaviour. There's other stresses. We've got light, the variation of light, coming from a very bright environment to quite a dark environment. So if your coop is quite dark, and then bang, outside and it's bright light and there's no protection, there's not a lot of shade or anything, that can be quite a trigger for feather pecking as well. So just that the contrast is not a great thing for chickens. If you have a bit of shade there, or you have a more subtle transition from sort of the darkness maybe of the coop out to the lighter areas, that can be a great thing too. Maybe just a cover over your run, and just a more gentle gradient, light gradient, until they reach sort of full sunlight out in the run. Lack of distractions is a big one too. Just they don't have that the interest, the activity, the things that they can play and jump on and keep themselves interested. And to say this is particularly for those hens that do like a heightened level of interesting things to entertain them. All right, so Exhibit A, the xylophone. The xylophone. Now, I have to admit, I haven't heard many hens play this particularly well, but I've got a number of customers that have the xylophone for the chicken to peck away at. And they say, I believe there was a famous chicken on America's Got Talent, I believe, who did play a xylophone, or was it an organ or something on stage, and did a very good job of it. So, there is hope yet for any of those that wanted budding trainers of chickens. But yeah, xylophone's not their best instrument, but they love to just something like to play with. Anything like that they can jump on. They'll tend to walk all over the course, and perches in the run as well as the coop. This gives them something to play on, to get up and down on, get some different elevation in the coop, and that really helps them to just settle in and not be encouraged to indulge in feather pecking behaviour. So we've got damp litter is another big thing. So the damp litter is a big problem. That's what we have from the nesting box, of course. We want it nice and dry in here. All right, and that's why obviously we use the hemp fibre, highly absorbent. Any moisture gets absorbed quickly. So your damp litter, they can't dig into it. They've got this wet litter on them. That can also be a trigger for feather pecking behaviour. We have poor feeders. That can be another problem too. All right, sometimes feeder design, they can't access the feed very well. Some feeders, tread-on feeders, sometimes it opens up like a mouth, and that can scare the chickens as well. So they can gain stress from the top of feeder, ironically, and drinker that they're using. And so anything like that that's causing stress is causing problems. Aggressive breeds is another thing. We have leghorns in the olden days that my wife has had a lot of experience with, and they would scratch, she would just be covered in scratches after handling them. This is a very aggressive breed, hard to handle. And there's some other breeds that are just a difficult bird to handle. Not like, we're a bit spoilt with our highlines, they're so jolly placid. But some breeds, also roosters of course, can be very aggressive. So some people have them in their flock, not so many in the city, but some do have them in the flock, and they can be quite aggressive too. So causing those heightened levels of stress in the flock. So remember that a sharp hook, particularly on the purebred hens, can just pluck off those feathers quite efficiently. So you've got to be a little bit mindful of the birds that have their full beak. They haven't had the laser beak trim. They haven't had that sharp hook that's crumbled off. That hook is very effective at plucking feathers out, and obviously also causing injury. So if we have any of the negative feather pecking behaviour, the bird with their full beak with a sharp hook can do a lot more damage than a bird without that sharp hook. So you have to be a bit more vigilant with birds if you have your chickens that still retain their full beak. Loud noises, of course. Dogs barking, tradesmen and whatnot, working, cars, loud, noisy cars, whatever it may be. These can also heighten the stress levels too for our flocks, which we want to avoid. So those are all some of the environmental stresses, potentials for stressing our birds. As I say, there might be 2 or 3 of them that might be causing that be building up in and around your coop, and that all contributes to increasing the risk of this negative feather pecking behaviour. The 2 big ones are feed and water. Hydration and their nutrition, of course, are key in feather pecking, negative feather pecking. And inadequate nutrition, and for example, feeding them porridge every day, these sorts of things are really unbalanced chickens, and they can really turn them into absolute maniacs when it comes to feather pecking. They can be quite unbalanced at times, and we have noticed some hens that some people have, just when we give them, whether it's our feed or another type of food, they go absolutely mental for it, and it's because they're missing out on some key nutrition. So porridge is not ideal to give them. Low fibre, also things like bread. No, any processed foods. We don't want to fill them up on that too much because it's very low in fibre, and low fibre diet and again, and the research has resulted in more aggressive behaviour from birds and more of this feather pecking. We have things, unbalanced diets, of course. So that's why, again, we always harp on about our feed being completely balanced. By having that, yeah, it's going to, they're going to have the balanced diet, everything's covered, and they're not going to be lacking in anything. A sudden change of feed from one to another, that causes stress. And it's a bit like us, I guess, travelling overseas, going to a new country, heading over to India and eating, curry and whatnot for the next month. It's quite a shock to your system. It takes a while to get used to that and the spices and whatnot. It's going to take time to adjust. Same with our hens as well. Layer pellets are, ironically, more stressful than jolly mash feed. So a mash feed, it's a combination of ingredients. The birds can select what they want to eat. So that's a bit more, maybe they just feel a bit more in control of that, whereas your layer pellets is one single fused element, and that, apparently according to the research, causes more stress for the bird. Water, dirty and stale water can be a problem. So obviously you need to keep that fresh as possible, and be mindful that rain tanks and things do also harbour contaminants, because you've got animals, possums, things that can get onto that roof. That water all comes down, bird droppings all comes down into the water system, into the water tank. And so by using that water, ideally we do need a filter. If you're using mains water though, like most backyards and city, no problem at all. Mains water is ideal, really. If we can drink it, the birds certainly can drink it, and that won't cause them stress through, tasting this contaminated water, and raising their stress levels. Warm drinking water is a problem, say in the summertime. Hot water is not a good thing, and it can get very hot in summer. Just watch out where the tank is located, where your drinker is located. Put it in shade. Ideally, it will be a drinker that we can add ice to. Cool that water down in the summertime on those really hot days. Can really help. Beware of your faulty drinkers. All right, any faulty drinkers, when they do require maintenance, they require a bit of work, so we need to be very aware of just maintaining drinkers, and also, of course, just keeping them nice and clean as well. The contaminants with their dust bathing behaviour and whatnot, they can fill up those containers quite easily, so we do want to make sure we're checking those and cleaning them out. Medicated drinking water, so typically dewormers. They typically do not like the flavour of the medicated water, and that's a big problem. They come and have a little sip of the water and they say, I'm not taking any more of that stuff, and that's it. They are stressed because they are thirsty. They want to drink, but they can't get it because they have decided that I don't like the taste of it. So I'm not very familiar to me, my 9-year-old, and I'm not going to drink it. So that can cause stress for the birds too. So the solutions to this are really observation. It's been very attentive to your flock. So observation, get out there for 10 minutes, have a listen and watch. Just see what's going on, and sometimes just sitting there quietly and just observing a bird, you can really learn a lot. We have had veterinarians at times visit our farm. A few years ago when we were through egg farming, and they would just basically sit down there. They'd just basically sit with a flock, and they'd just be sitting there looking around, observing, and from that, and then they would say, oh, I think this is going on, I think we might need to do this or this or this. So a lot of the time, yeah, just by very good observation, and just obviously experience helps with that, but just sitting down and listening, you can really pick up a lot from chickens as well, which can really help. Any odd behaviour, squawking, whatnot, squawking sounds, well, that's certainly an indication that some sort of negative, generally feather pecking behaviour is going on. So watch for the squawks, look for bald patches on the bird. Any missing feathers, clumps of feathers, any skin showing, all signs that we're getting into the aggressive feather pecking behaviour. And you need to nurse hens, you need to isolate hens from the bully, or isolate the bully from the flock, because the bully is causing those, the heightened levels of stress for the whole flock. And the next thing, yes, all the negative things that can happen to them, those heightened levels of stress, the egg problems, the disease, susceptibility to disease, the lowering of the immune system, it's all happening with that stress caused by this bully, or the hen that's just decided, I need more activity, and I'm going to just take it out on my mates in this location because I'm bored. All right, so yeah, if you notice that's clearly happening and missing patches of feathers, you get her out of there, keep her away from there. So feather pecking, bright light can really encourage it. Any bare skin, look for that. Any blood, look for that. We need to clean that as soon as possible. We need to spray it with, whether it's betadine or Centrogen is another spray that we can put on any wounds on a chicken, but we want to stop any blood. We don't want, the other chickens will naturally peck at blood or bare skin, so we've got to stop that. And if you can put something, some sort of liquid, or sorry, a cream, antiseptic cream on the area, can really help in just stopping the other chickens from continuing to peck. But isolation may be necessary for up to a week or so to allow the healing to get going, and then maybe a thick layer of a cream so that if a chicken happens to peck at it, they find it a horrible taste, you know, and they won't do that. So the environmental enrichment is something is key. So we will need to relieve the boredom in your coop. If you happen to have a bit of a coop which is your standard backyard chicken coop, not a lot of room, maybe you don't have a huge area for them to range in, we need to just think about enrichment. And we need to think of enrichment being ladders, being, the things I've mentioned before as far as children's toys, you know, tyres. The tyre's a great thing to have out there to create a dust bath. And they can get in there, they'll not only walk around the tyre and do their stuff, but they will tend to get in, and you put your shavings, wood ash, a bit of diatomaceous earth in there, and they get in there and have a good old dust bath. And the dust bath is a great way of keeping your birds entertained and active. That's naturally, they love to dust bath, and they get in there into an old rubber tyre, and you fill it up there, and then it's a favourite little place for them to get stuck into. So make sure it's in a dry area. But button up like pumpkin, cut a pumpkin into quarters, put that in there. And they could be whacking away, one on each area, or can be hanging away there for hours. To entertain themselves. So again, if you're noticing any sort of pecking, we might want to just get them out there and get them pecking away on a pumpkin, just to distract them. Old gumboots, water bottles, things like that, you know, they love that. Pecking away gumboots, as you know, bang, 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 bang on the, you know, any metal bins, you know, rubbish bin or a watering can or anything, they'll tap, tap, tap on there constantly. Oh yeah, once again, they're demonstrating beautifully at the moment. They love it. Piece of corrugated iron out there, and they'll be tapping away that for hours. Maybe an old bicycle, you know, they could, yeah, they have a lot of fun on one of those. So mirrors, we have a mirror in here, of course, and that's, yeah, now and again, they get up there, they'll look at themselves and they'll see all this extra virtual space. So, you know, they can entertain themselves a little bit with that. It's another good way of doing it. But yeah, the toys, tyres, pumpkin, even hanging a few DVDs and CDs, although some customers that I've mentioned that to, they say, oh, that scares the chickens. Their chickens are going to take off when they see it. So it won't always work, and that's why you need to experiment a little bit and just work out what works well to entertain your chickens and keep them happy as well. So with that, the final part was really just introducing new chickens. All right, so we bring new hens into your flock. Let's have the same number or more, ideally, all right, into an existing flock. Otherwise, you're going to have the existing flock all pecking on one or two newcomers, because yeah, normally the way it works. So if you have, ideally you're bringing new hens, if you can separate them during the day, that can be quite handy, and particularly if you have a separate water, you know, dish of water or food for them. Because we do need to make sure those new hens in the new environment are getting the nutrition and the hydration that they need. So that's really important. Put them all in together at night, of course. Get out there first thing in the morning just to make sure that, don't have your existing hens, one's deciding to fire up and get stuck into them again. So you have to be quite vigilant at first light, and just keep them separated. Just for 1 or 2 days, and then hopefully one morning you get out there and a little bit of pecking, a little bit of chasing, and then you think, oh, okay, no, they're pretty much settled in together okay. And it's just a piece of chicken wire along the corner of your coop is sufficient during the day, just to keep that separation. Your new hens won't be able to be attacked. Your existing flock might try and attack them through the mesh. They won't be able to do any damage. So you're just going to ensure that you're not going to get this negative pecking behaviour happening too soon when introducing new flock members. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of the presentation. So any questions at all on what I've just gone through? Yes?
We're about to get new chickens for an existing flock.
Uh-huh.
So we've got it all separated and everything like that.
Great.
We let them out during the day, like in the garden. Can we let them out together, or is it best doing separately?
I tend to keep them separated just initially, because if they sort of go out together, they might follow the old ones out, but it's just they're settling in, they don't know where home is, not what's going on, and I normally like to keep them, as long as the coop has enough, and the run has enough sort of, it's enough room, sort of roughly a square metre per hen is my rule of thumb. If they've got that room, I tend to try and get them closer to the feed and water, and don't let them range too far in that first what I call orientation for that first sort of week or two, really. You know, but you can experiment. The worst thing is that you're going to have to pick them up and you bring them in at night time, or you wonder where are they, end up in some tree somewhere, or they can do some. I certainly would never let them into a run that has an open top, because quite often times, yeah, you know, if they can fly straight out of there. They can fly out at night, and I've had chickens eaten before because I've had a customer that hasn't locked them away in a physical coop. They've sort of had this run area too, and the old birds will take themselves back into the coop, no problem. But these young birds, they were out there in the front, and one just flew over the fence, and fox got it straight away. So, and that was on the first night, I think it was. So yeah, no, we need to keep them in a heightened sort of awareness of the new birds for that first sort of week or so. What I call orientation, I guess, really. Settle them in, less room. Yeah, it's not cruel. They've got enough room there. They're quite happy, got their food and their water. They'll be quite timid. It takes a while until they start to get confidence and they start to head out further, and then they can get out with the other existing flock and interact together.